Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Catherine Zobri. I'm a business advisor with the Alabama Small Business Development Center. We provide no-cost one-on-one business advising for all Alabama small businesses, and I cover the Birmingham area. So I am very pleased to have you here today, and especially pleased to introduce our guests. So before we get into that, I want to go through a little bit of housekeeping. There will be time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation, but I know sometimes it's hard to keep that question in your head. So if you have a question throughout the presentation, please drop it in the chat. There'll be plenty of opportunities for you to participate. If you have an opinion about something, we'd love to hear that. Drop all of that in the chat, and then at the end we'll go through some of those questions and see what we can answer live and see what we can get back to you on as well. This is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel, and you can find all of the partners that are making this collaborative effort of Rebound Birmingham such an excellent resource on this slide. So you can see there's over 14 different organizations that have been participating in this collaborative effort, and everybody has a really interesting and unique perspective on different topics. And so you can find all of our previous talks on the Rebound Birmingham YouTube channel. You can sign up for the next events, which Robert will cover after the presentation coming up next week. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our two fantastic speakers today. First and foremost, we have Victor Brown. Victor Brown is the Business Development Officer for the Birmingham Business Alliance. He takes an intentional approach to identify and bring into the Birmingham area traditional, emerging, and underrepresented industries and sectors. And he really is the heart of for me at least, he's the heart of economic development for the Birmingham area. If you don't know somebody and you need to, Victor Brown probably knows them. So aside from being a wealth of information and having an extreme depth of information as well, and depth of knowledge, especially about inventory management and fulfillment practices, Victor is just one of the most charismatic and welcoming people that you will ever meet. Additionally, we have a fantastic other speaker, Larry Prickle, a CPA from Warren Averett. Larry is a native, or he is local to the Birmingham area. He's been in the accounting practice for over 25 years and has experienced everything from startup to multinational companies. So you have a question about sort of best practices, Larry's the guy to go to. He has experience working in government contracting, technology, manufacturing, and of course, what's most important to today's conversation is distribution services. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our wonderful speakers today, and they will tell you more about inventory management.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. I really appreciate that. What a wonderful introduction. So welcome, everybody. It's good to be here with you today. And, just to kind of get us started, jumping right into this topic of inventory management, fulfillment, and your bottom line. This was influenced through, as Catherine shared, the work that we're doing together under Rebound Birmingham with 16 partners, resource partners, and more being added every day, designed to help companies like yours and others that aren't on this Zoom today with figuring out how to get through the challenges. Many challenges existed before COVID for small business, and even more during COVID, which is what really motivated the work of Rebound BHAM. As you may have seen in some of the communications, inventory management can really be, and my friend Larry, instead of valuable, an amazing asset or a costly cash flow killer. Right, Larry?
You're right, Victor. I agree.
Yes, sir. And we want to talk about the opportunities that exist for companies that have been in business and for new businesses that can benefit from gaining an understanding of the basic fundamentals. Now today, Larry and I, as much as we love accounting, and I know Larry loves complex formulas and ratios, and we could have done this presentation with a lot of ratios and spreadsheets and journal entries, but that's not why we're here today. This is really going to be more of a primer, more of a bringing to top of mind things that you may already know. So don't shoot us for doing something that you may feel might insult your intelligence because you know much more maybe than I do, or maybe Larry does. But hang in there. We want to really guide us all into this topic, but not make it too complex today. That would go beyond what we're going to do today. But certainly, as Catherine said, we will be available for you to answer any questions that might not be covered in this workshop, or that may not be covered in the question and answer session today. So Larry, any other thoughts before we dive into the next slide?
No, just glad to be here. That's a great introduction. We appreciate it, and look forward to talking about inventory management and fulfillment and how it can impact and enhance your bottom line.
All right, with that, we go to the first slide, and that is inventory management. And next slide. So sometimes much of what we talk about, and I know that it was this way when I was a young accountant and getting into my field, is, you know, people talk about, well, what do we have on hand? And we got to make sure that we get it to our customer when they want it. But there's a whole lot more to that, right, Larry?
Yes, I agree.
So definitely, let's go to the next slide, and we'll get into this even more.
Yeah, as Victor was saying, there's a lot more to just what you have on hand in terms of inventory. And we've seen over the years, kind of, as you've noticed on the last slide, a push towards a just-in-time inventory where one producer maintains as little inventory as possible and relies on other producers, often located nearby, to supply their needs just as they need them. And that can be an extremely efficient inventory approach when it's working very well. But just boiling it down to the basics, as we all know from COVID, it doesn't work so well if something unexpected, unforeseen, and unprecedented hits, and then you're needing paper towels at the grocery store. Then just in time may not work as well as it had been working. So back to Victor's point that it is all balanced. Yes, you want to try to minimize inventory as much as possible, and we're going to talk about that, and operate as lean as possible. But at the same time, inventory can have a valuable role. And so basically what we're trying to say here is you don't want to overstock, but you don't want to understock. So you want to try to find that balance where at the end of the day, it all comes together and you're taking care of your customers and you're ensuring that the right inventory reaches the right customer at the right time. Because if you don't, as we've kind of suggested, it will have a negative impact on your customers' thoughts of you. Just think about if you go, again, to the grocery store example, to look for something and you really need that one key item and they're out. It tends to leave you with a negative impression. Or if you go online to your favorite retailer and they have this tremendous thing that you're wanting to purchase, however, they just don't happen to have your size or your color or whatever, it can leave you with a negative taste. And so it can be in a manufacturing or industrial setting as well, whether you're shipping to retail customers or to other businesses, that it can leave a negative impact if you have too short of a supply of inventory. And so really at the end of the day, what we're getting at is it can be a make or break proposition. On the one hand, too much inventory can be costly, and we'll talk about that some more as we proceed forward. But at the same time, not enough inventory can have its own cost in terms of customer satisfaction and your ability to fulfill. And so many companies have succumbed to that, and it's led to the downfall of many companies. And we'll talk about a few examples here in a minute. Next.
You know,
it's
easier. You know, it's easier said than done, isn't it, Larry? I mean,
sure.
You know, I was in, you know, when you think about all the myriad, and for all of you, you know, some of you, and I would love for people to maybe put in the chat what type of business you have, and we'll be sure to look at the chat and maybe address that as we can. But, you know, we have the audiences that we've been working with are everything from food trucks to restaurants to retailers to manufacturing companies all across the board. These concepts are relevant. I can remember when I was in the food business, which is one of the most challenging jobs I ever had. I got involved early in my career in Hello Naughty But Nice Kettle Corn. I started my career in high dollar inventory, $500,000 engines, $75,000 propellers at Lockheed Georgia Company. And when I could not locate that inventory, it was a problem. We had to identify specifically where those propellers and engines would go by plane. And I had to learn as a young accountant, I had to pay attention. By the same token, when I worked in food beverage at Dobbs Houses, I had to analyze the inventory, sales and distribution at the units in the concessions of every single hot dog, popcorn for Miss Sims, everything that was sold. I had to estimate how many were being sold. And Larry and I are going to talk about that in a little bit. So it's so clear to us and hopefully to you that the time we're spending today on this topic truly is all about balance. Let's go to the next slide. Looks like somebody's balling up some money and throwing it away. And you don't want to do that, do you, Larry?
No, not at all.
Poor inventory management could be ruining your profit and reputation. That's why we're here today to talk about cash flow, profit, our bottom line, and not just look at inventory. Yes, it's an asset, but don't get so enamored by the fact that I'm so happy to have this inventory and I don't have to worry about getting product to my customer unless you're not making sales. And again, we'll talk about that a little later. Now, Larry and I have to get you ready before you look at this next slide. And we want to see how many people are going to be able to avoid going to get a snack when they see this next slide. Right, Larry?
That's right.
All right, let's go. Oh, okay, I'm going to get some candy out of the candy box right now. Okay, I'm going to stay here. So Larry, you want to kick us off on this one? What are we looking at here? A candy and a barcode? I mean, what's this all about?
Sure, and it may seem simple just to think, oh, candy or food or whatever, but as I mentioned, there can be costly mistakes, and so we just wanted to point out a couple of them. There was one in the chocolate industry in which they missed the seasonality, they missed the Halloween delivery deadlines, and resulted in $100 million worth of problem for the company. And that gets into an interesting point, because not all inventory is alike. Some inventory, such as food items, can be perishable. Some inventory items can be seasonal, such as this. No one wants Halloween candy for Thanksgiving. So inventory can lead to a lot of different issues depending on the nature of the inventory. Technologies can become obsolete. You know, people may not want last year's telephone once the new version of a telephone comes out. So it brings up a couple of important issues there about timing and seasonality and so on, and how different inventories can have a big impact on how you manage those inventories and avoid mistakes. And same also with tracking, I would say, is kind of the next item, where a large retail conglomerate had a significant barcode number mismatch and resulted in a $2 billion loss. So while there are a lot of tools and technologies and barcodes and barcode scanners and computers that can analyze all the data that you gather from barcodes, still a mistake can happen and it can be costly. And so accuracy of how you track that inventory, the methods and the tools that you use to track that inventory can be very critical to your business profitability, and will directly impact the health of your bottom line of your financial statements. Victor?
Yeah, wow, that is a lot of money, isn't it, everybody? I mean, you're talking somebody slipped up somehow and missed a connection, didn't communicate with the transportation team, whatever happened, they missed it. And November 1st comes along as Larry said, we don't want Halloween candy on Thanksgiving. You know, that day, I mean, that's the day that we all go to the store if we're candy lovers and want to take advantage of a deep discount on candy. Hey, November 1st is the day to go in there and get it for half off or 75% off. So you don't want your company to go through something like that. You don't want to deal with it, but you think about it, your friends, your family, the things you even sell, being mindful of the things that Larry's talked about in terms of seasonality. Have you been monitoring and analyzing when you make the most sales or why? When we think about naughty but nice, there's certain times that Ms. Sims can deal with the spikes in her revenue. So if she's got a system set up to monitor that, then it works out well. There's going to be times when people want their naughty but nice kettle corn and they want it now, like a J.G. Wentworth situation. That candy maker doesn't get a redo on Halloween, and we don't get a redo when we realize that the timing of certain times that we can sell our product comes about. You know, what happens when somebody falls asleep at the wheel of a car on the road? Well, maybe they have an accident, or maybe a police officer comes by and arrests them, or at least tells them to move on and tries to find out, why are you sleeping in your car? You might be okay, but this falling asleep at the wheel is just not appropriate. And how many times, you know, I've heard times when someone's told me, hey, I went into the store and this item was $7, and when I got to the cash register, they said, no, that's not $7, that's $70. Well, yeah, but that tag is on there for $7, and many times they have to sell that item. So again, you want to avoid simple mistakes that can be avoided. Next slide, please. Larry, you want to kick us off on the benefits of inventory management?
Glad to. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about inventory management and how it can help your company. And so we tried to break it down into just a few key topics here. And it's probably not good presentation style, but I sort of think it's good to start at the end on this one with customer loyalty, because that's really our end goal here, is to develop good, happy, loyal, returning customers that love doing business with your business. And so inventory is an important part of that. It's not the only part, but it's an important part to developing that brand and that customer loyalty. And so we're talking a lot here about reducing inventory carrying costs. And we talked about how there's a lot of initiatives to do that, like lean inventory management, just-in-time inventory management. We talked briefly about what those are, and 100% agree you want to reduce inventory carrying costs as much, because the more inventory you have, the more carrying costs you will that will be associated with that inventory. So for example, if you have more inventory, you have to finance that inventory somehow, some way. Most companies have some sort of a bank facility, maybe a line of credit that they're using to advance to purchase their inventory carrying costs. And then as they sell it, they can repay that line of credit. Well, that line of credit obviously has an interest element to it. And so the more inventory you have, the more debt you have, the more interest you're paying for that. Or even more practical, is that if you have more inventory, you may need more space. So you may have to rent more warehouse space to store your inventory, or you may need more people to process that inventory. And so it's important to try to reduce your inventory carrying costs. And one way that you may be able to do that is, from time to time, it may make sense to bulk up on inventory. If you get a great deal from your supplier, it may make sense to go ahead and bulk up and take advantage of some sort of bulk or quantity discount, as long as it exceeds your carrying costs that you've got for carrying it, whether that's more warehouse space or more financing costs or whatever. So that at the end of the day, you're seeking to achieve what I might call an optimization. It might be another way to talk about balance, is that you're trying to achieve an inventory optimization, where you're achieving as much inventory turnover as possible that makes sense without losing sight of your customer loyalty. So you're sort of always walking this tightrope, if you will, between two channel markers of cost versus service. And so you want it to be a win-win for everyone, a partnership with your customers at the end of the day. Victor?
And thanks, Larry. And I noticed in the chat that companies involved in wholesale pipe valve fitting distribution, so there may be a relationship with a manufacturer. One of the pains in the whole system as it relates to supply chain and inventory is, hey, are you a distributor or are you a manufacturer? So as you look at most of the time, and sadly, when it comes to conversations about inventory, we tend to lean toward finished goods and products that are already ready, that candy already manufactured. And maybe that was part of the problem with the candy manufacturers. Maybe they were did not meet their timelines in the manufacturing process to get that finished goods ready to go for Halloween. Or it may be that if they were a distributor and something went wrong on the transportation side, and I mentioned earlier, I remember when I started my career in inventory as a young accountant, not only was I responsible for the high dollar engines and propellers for Lockheed Georgia company, but I also had responsibility for miscellaneous small parts, for spares. I literally had to walk over to where the spares department was, as well as the tool and die area, and literally eyeball to determine what was on hand. I mean, it was unbelievable. When I was first told I had to do that, I was like, there's no way I'm going to go be able to look at a lot of unfinished items and come up with an inventory figure. But over time, I got better and better at it. So there's just complexity and challenge with inventory beyond what is on the surface without having a discussion like we're having today. But what do we do about, the raw materials, the raw materials, the work in process, the items that create that. So again, way beyond the scope of what we want to talk about today, but we want you all to know that regardless of whether we dig deep into some of these items today, they are relevant, and Larry and I are here for you, as well as Catherine and others, to help you delve into those topics. Next slide, please.
Can I jump in here, Victor?
Please do.
So I placed an order on Amazon the other day because I was out of crushed red peppers. And the bag that I got was not crushed red peppers, but the barcode said crushed red peppers. So now I've got a pound of cumin seeds. So if anybody needs cumin seeds, you just but I'll tell you what, I am not going to order from them again. Drop it in the chat if you have ever had that happen to you, where you ordered something and the wrong item showed up, or you have mistakenly shipped the wrong item, and how you corrected that action with your customers. Thanks.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. A lot of people wouldn't realize that even at an accounting firm like what Larry works for, you got a process that involves the distribution of your product to clients and customers, and you've got to make sure that that product is done accurately. So I love that example. So now we're digging into fulfillment. Next slide, please.
So as Victor said, we're moving sort of to the second phase of our presentation. We've talked about inventory management, and now we're in the middle section of our presentation where we're going to talk about fulfillment, which is really getting your inventory to your customers. And we're going to talk about it, but at the end of the day, it seems to always involve buying it, making it, storing it, moving it, and selling it. And so here's a little graphic that we've put together to try to explain or to demonstrate, to illustrate, if you will, third-party fulfillment. And you can see here, and what we're talking about, just backing up before we get into third-party fulfillment, is you have multiple choices on how you can manage your inventory. You might choose a DIY approach, a do-it-yourself approach, where you have your own facilities. It may be your garage, it may be a warehouse, or whatever, a manufacturing facility that has storage space. So you may do it yourself and manage it yourself. And we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of that approach. Or there are opportunities to do third-party fulfillment. And we just talked about Amazon. That's one opportunity where, a lot of things you buy on Amazon are coming straight from an Amazon warehouse, but there are a lot of things that are flowing through there through the third-party sellers. You'll notice whenever you're purchasing something, if it's coming from Amazon or if it's coming from one of their third-party sellers, well, if it's one of their third-party sellers, they offer services where they can be the third-party fulfillment and store that inventory. And so that's really kind of what we're talking about here. Is your first item is that your products are purchased and shipped to the 3PL. That's just kind of short code for third-party logistics. You see that abbreviation a lot, 3PL, third-party logistics. So the items are bought, they're stored at someone else's facility, not your facility, at a third-party fulfillment center in someone else's warehouse. But you're able to see it on your systems and you're able to track it. And then your customer places an order with you. Then you notify the third-party fulfillment center, who then ships on your behalf the item to the customer. So again, we'll come to a lot of the pros and cons in a minute, but as you can see, it's one thing that you can outsource and they can take care of it for you, but at the same time, you're giving up a little bit of control to the process to someone else. So that can be a good thing many times, because a lot of times a third-party fulfillment may have best practices built in because they do it all day long, all the time for many companies. But if you have something very specialized and have a certain way you want to do things, you will give up a little bit of that control to use a third-party fulfillment center. Victor?
Absolutely. It's, just a great process. And I guess we can go on to the next slide. But, well, before we leave this slide, I want to talk a little bit about, I see a lot of going on in the chat about Amazon. So as we begin to really think about the Amazon effect, and we can talk an entire hour about the tremendous impact, both positive and negative, that Amazon has had. I see we got Michael Gunn in the house from Signature Express Transport. Welcome, Michael. Hope you put something in the chat and hope you'll stick around for the conversation. So Michael and our friends at companies like SGI with Sandy Gornati, they're involved in the last mile distribution, where they've got relationships that help those manufacturers or major distributors get their product to final destinations. So Mr. Gunn's in that business, and we're going to be looking at future opportunities for others to help support companies like his, as well as use his company's services. So shout out on that. But the Amazon effect for business owners, for distributors, for those involved in supply chain has been tremendous. This company has literally come into various industries. I don't know if we've got any authors or book publishers online, but Amazon, as they started out kind of being the online bookseller, was where they kind of made their name, and now they're online everything. Major impact on cost of distribution. Distribution costs is being driven down, and that's a fundamental of what customers are looking for as it relates to supply chain, is how do we reduce our costs. So there's an inventory relationship with all of that. But the Amazon effect should not be ignored, regardless of whether you decide to do business with Amazon. And you'll be hearing about a seminar on September 28th that really is going to help you on the sales side. And I think Catherine just was involved in a seminar talking about the sales side. And September 28th, there'll be another Amazon workshop and seminar, webinar, that'll cover that side as well. But companies like Bookmasters, for example, they do fulfillment. But as we get into some of the advantages and disadvantages that relate to that, we'll dig into those things. So go on to the next slide and we'll keep on moving.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the drop ship model. So we talked about do it yourself, and we talked about the third-party logistics. And another model is, which can be highly efficient because you essentially carry no inventory, is where you make arrangements with your supplier, whoever supplies you with inventory, such that when your customer places an order with your store, either in presence at a physical store or online through a virtual store, that you then notify the supplier to send it directly to the customer. So as you can see, the benefits there is it's completely shortcutting one of the middlemen. It's not having to be stored either at your warehouse, which would be the do-it-yourself approach. It's not having to be stored at a third-party logistics. It's coming straight from the supplier. And that is a very common approach. There are a lot of manufacturers and distribution companies that follow this very model. And so it can be a good thing for the suppliers. It can be a good thing for the companies that are doing it, and it can be a good thing for the customers as well when it can be arranged. Victor?
Efficiency in action. Let's move on to the next slide. So I'll kick us off on this one. So this is what Larry mentioned earlier. we put together a chart for you all that gets into the advantages and disadvantages of whether you do it yourself or use an outsourced solution. And again, we've got, I know Michael Gunn is on the Zoom, and his company provides some of these services. So as you notice, there's quite a few pros on the side of the outsourced solution. When you look at the con side, you know, control is an issue in that first row. You give up control, but then on the pro side, you have control on the DIY side. The DIY side doesn't have as many pros. Doesn't mean that that's a bad thing, but what it brings to mind for me as I thought through, you know, why there's so many pros is when you think about having to hire people, and we definitely want to talk about workforce a little bit before we finish up today. By hiring and retaining people, if you take a chance and you decide, you know, I'm going to load up my garage or my dining room or my spare room with a lot of inventory and I'm going to do it myself, well, can you afford to hire someone and pay them a salary to do every day what needs to be done? What happens when they call in sick? And if you start this business and you've got a full-time job, so all of these are considerations as you're thinking about, at least at the onset, whether you want to go with an outsourced solution or not. And in many cases, as we can see on the pro side, there's a great reasons for that. The skills, they've got the warehouse space already. Ideal for local and international distribution. I mean, that when you start getting into international business, it's risky. I just had a conversation with a business here, and just, it was a disastrous situation they ran into internationally. But there are resources connected with Catherine's organization that can help you get into international business. So that might be a consideration for you if you're going to go DIY. Speed of delivery really works well for businesses that are growing fast. Sometimes your business may grow faster than you can hire the right people, so outsourcing may be the way to go. So that just gives you kind of a overview of this chart. We'll be sending you all these slides, so don't worry about trying to write everything down. You will have access to these with the recording. Larry, you want to chime on anything else on this slide before we move on?
I think you pretty well covered it. The good thing is that you do have options from do-it-yourself to third-party to drop ship, and it's an important decision. And it's not an all or none. It may be that certain items you do yourself. We see companies that do certain items themselves and do certain things by third-party and do certain things by drop ships. So it's not an all or none. It's just good to have choices.
Great. Next slide, please. All right. Now we're getting into your bottom line. Show me the money, Larry.
All right, let's move on to the next slide. And as Victor said, we're transitioning. We've covered the first two sections, inventory management and fulfillment, and now we're transitioning into your bottom line, which is where it all kind of ends up in terms of how well you manage your inventory will impact your bottom line. Before we get too deep into how it impacts your bottom line, let's just step back and we talked about inventory management, but before we totally leave those first couple of sections, let me talk about how there are different types of inventory management systems. And you'll see in the little graphic on the side, we really have 4 check boxes, but I think it's really 2 categories of 2, if you will. You'll see there's 2 methods and there's 2 systems. The first 2 are the methods and the last 2 are the systems. And so one method for inventory management would be the periodic method, and one would be the perpetual method. And what we mean by that would be a periodic method is often seen maybe in smaller companies where there's not as much inventory, or maybe they haven't been around as long to develop their tracking systems. And so basically it just means every so often, every so many periods, maybe that's at month end, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's annually, but every so often on a periodic basis, you just count your inventory and see what you have. You just stop, take a time out, and add it all up. Walk out there wherever you're storing it, your garage, warehouse, whatever, and count it up and put it into your accounting system, and that's how much inventory you have. You count it, you multiply by the value, the cost, and that's how much inventory you have. As companies progress and need better information and insight into their inventories, they generally migrate to a perpetual method of tracking the inventory. Often you never totally get away from the periodic method in terms of checking the perpetual method. So even if you get on a perpetual method, which means you're perpetually, constantly tracking every in and out of your inventory, every purchase is going in your books, and every sale is being taken out of inventory, so that it's being tracked in the inventory system on a perpetual basis. But because errors can and do happen from time to time, it's still usually important to have some sort of method of testing that perpetual system. And usually there's various ways of performing a periodic check. Maybe that's a count at the end of the year, maybe that's cycle counts or whatever. But the two, one is kind of a progression of the other one, but the one that you progress from is often used to check the latter. Couple of systems for tracking inventory, and again, we're kind of talking about inventory systems. You've got two choices of the type systems, and you have ways of tracking it. A couple of examples would be a barcode system or RFID tracking. Most of us are familiar with a barcode. You see them on anything you buy, from electronics to food items or whatever, but everything has a barcode. And the benefit of that is it makes it easy to scan your inventory, to take inventory. You can walk along and just hit it with a scanner and tell exactly what you have. It makes it easy to ring up customers if at the end. It makes it easier to identify things in your inventory system. And so it can be a very efficient system with everything being assigned a barcode. And it can fit on just about any type. You see it a lot of times on smaller items, like I mentioned, electronics, food items, and a whole host of other items. RFID is a great technology, and you would probably see it on larger inventory type items. For example, it's not uncommon to see RFID used in a construction site. That may not be an inventory you immediately think about, but it's an important inventory. If you're building a giant shopping mall or office building or hospital or whatever you're constructing, and all of a sudden, you can't find a critical part that's the next step in your construction, it can be extremely costly because the project, construction can be put on hold while you hunt for the items that you need. But with RFID tagging, they're transmitting a little signal, kind of a radio signal, radio frequency ID that can be picked up by a sensor. Sometimes those are fixed sensors. Sometimes they might be mounted on the back of a truck, and you can just drop through your inventory yard and find out where everything is. So the point being, though, without getting too detailed about barcodes or RFID tags, is that there are multiple systems for tracking your inventory that can help you better manage that inventory, which will then lead to the better you track it, the better you manage it, the better your bottom line will be. And we work with a few large distributors. It's not uncommon for them to say that, at the end of the day, their job really is to manage inventory and receivables. And receivables really kind of outside the scope of this one, but that's where inventory goes. Once you sell it, you end up with a receivable from the customer, and you eventually collect it. But the point being that it is one of the key things you have to manage if you have a lot of inventory. And these are ways to do it and tools to use to do it. Victor?
I can remember when I first got into the food business, which I know my friend who's on the line who helped me with another seminar, Jennifer Senske Ryan of Blue Root. The first system I used was in her industry, which is the food industry. We had lots of units, restaurants, snack bars, and lounges at the airports that Dobbs owned. And lettuce, bread, those items are being sold every day. You're ordering inventory. If Jennifer wants to leave her store or get busy doing other things, then she's got to depend on a system that her employees are doing. If somebody messes up and isn't ringing something up properly on a cash register, or if that POS system isn't tied in, then in the back of the house where the inventory is, it may be off. Are we ordering too much lettuce? Are we not ordering enough? We want those delicious chicken salads that Blue Root makes to be available for us. So when we go in there, they are there. And a system of inventory that ties in with your sales piece, that is so critical. Let's move on to the next slide. So here's a slide that deals with facts about inventory. And this really, as we've talked about before, one of the largest assets on a company's balance sheet. And it's where I started my career. I used to compute. I remember being told that, okay, as part of your assignment, I was an intern, and I was told, okay, you're going to do a cost of carrying inventory. I was so confused about what it was, but basically in a nutshell as we look at storage, insurance, interest, and the opportunity cost. If I'm going to have $1 million of inventory on hand, and that inventory is not moving, not turning over. And again, we're not getting into inventory turnover ratios and all that. But what if I could have taken that money and invested it into a bond and get an 8% yield? Back when I was a young man, it was like 11% yield, but I'm not going to tell you how old I am. But you know, if you've got an opportunity to generate revenue and you've got it all tied up in inventory is not selling, that money would have been better spent another way, right? So I know we're getting short on time, so we won't belabor this point. Just keep in mind that if you got these assets, you've got to make sure that you're not having inventory sitting around and not being sold. Next slide.
And
So Larry, take
all
us
right,
away.
yeah. And so that brings us to profit, which is really your bottom line. And so looking at the picture, the image, the graphic that we have there, a lot of this has to do with kind of achieving a break-even point. You know, when you first start out, you've got a lot of costs, and a significant element of those costs is your inventory costs. That's a significant part of what your cost of doing business is. And so initially, you know, a lot of times your costs exceed your revenue. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that whenever you start a business, you have certain fixed costs. Now, you may be able to minimize your fixed costs by, you know, outsourcing or by operating lean or whatever. But usually you're going to have some fixed costs. Maybe that's your warehouse. Maybe that's other items, delivery items that you have to purchase. And while you have those fixed costs, it takes you a while usually to build up enough revenue to start exceeding those fixed costs. So you might be, you know, selling an item that you buy for $8 and selling it for $10, and you'd be thinking, why am I not profitable? But if you have $100,000 a year of warehouse lease expense, it takes a while before those $2 per item cover your $100,000 per year of fixed costs. That kind of illustrates your variable costs in that case would be your sales price minus your cost of your inventory, and then you have to have enough of those to cover your fixed costs. And once you tip the balance and cross that break-even point where your variable costs and your variable profit is exceeding your fixed costs, then you do begin to achieve profit. And then as you continue to grow beyond that, ever increasing profit. So again, we've talked a lot about the various carrying costs of inventory, such as, you know, advertising expenses, payroll, and product development. But the way you achieve this pivot, if you will, from loss to profit, this break-even pivot, would be to prioritize budgeting. You really, budgeting may not be the only thing that's important in your business, but it is a very important part of your business. And so you want to prioritize it, and by budgeting, it doesn't necessarily just mean a bunch of numbers. What you're really trying to think about is, what do I think my sales are going to be? Can I develop an accurate sales projection? What do I think I'll be able to sell? Which will then drive your projection of what you need to purchase and buy. And that's important because there's often lead times in both what you need to sell to your customer and what you need to obtain to satisfy that sale to your customer. And so you want to try to have as accurate as possible of sales projections married up with your purchases, so that your inventory can stay lean as possible and not build up. Because if you miss those projections, again, one of two things is going to happen. One, if you overestimate your sales projections, you may buy too much inventory and not sell it all, and you run into risk of either a temporary risk or a permanent risk. You could have a temporary risk in that you can build up inventory for a period of time that you eventually sell your way through. It just takes you longer than you thought. Or you could come up with a permanent risk in that, you know, where we talked about seasonality and obsolescence and these sort of things, you could have bought too much inventory that no one wants next year. And if you didn't sell it in the current year, you know, if you're in the business of selling electronics or fashion or these types of things, if you don't sell it in the year that it's hot, you may never sell it. So if you miss your sales projections, it can be a temporary thing sometimes, just until you work it out, or it can sometimes be a permanent thing that you end up with inventory that you have to essentially scrap or not ever be able to sell. So as you're thinking through developing your budgets of sales and shipments, you also want to kind of think about milestones in your business. If you're that electronics manufacturer that's about to come out with, version 12 of whatever it is that you're making, you may want to pare back or slow down on manufacturing or orders of version 11 because you're about to release version 12 to the marketplace. And so thinking about different milestones in your business can also drive these projections that you're thinking about and these forecasts of both your sales and your production of your inventory. Victor?
Yes, sir. So definitely, this is such a critical area, and really, this is the plateau or the real crescendo, the height of the mountain of this whole conversation. And quite frankly, this is what drove us to do this workshop, is talking about the cost, volume, and profit relationships. And this is where we are right now. As you think about, we could have spent this whole time looking at ratios and financial statements and that type of thing, but we wanted to draw you in, use a little bit of candy to make you have some fun. But the bottom line is the bottom line, and that is, how do we look at our financials? So, we want to, as we come toward the final slide, what we want to do is talk about how you do need that cash budget. You do need that inventory and cost of goods sales budget. You do need that sales budget to help you make decisions to determine what needs to happen in order to run your company properly, to order the right amount of inventory at the right time, and to develop a business model. Larry and I have served together on nonprofit boards of directors like the Birmingham Venture Club. We have worked closely with companies that have been in competitions and have won at Alabama Launchpad, and some companies that, even if they didn't participate in Launchpad, Larry has been just a great friend to small business to really help companies understand the milestones in their business model. And a milestone, may not necessarily be 12 months. It could be 18 months. It could be 2 years, but you want to keep in mind, when do I think I'm going to meet my sales goals at a certain point in time in the future? And how do I marry or merge the ordering of inventory, the hiring of employees, all that on that timeline within that milestone? So we could stay on this slide for another half hour or more, but we've only got 10 minutes or less. So we'll move on to the final slide. And this slide is just a final word about, this is really the new world, and COVID, even though we were already moving toward this idea of, I'd rather order online than go into the store. Obviously, COVID accelerated that to now I'm not going into the store. I'm not going into the restaurant. I'm ordering. So companies like Shipt have gotten involved in that. We all individually have gotten involved in that. Omni-channel e-commerce is ruling the roost. Basically, we are in an e-commerce world more and more every day, and because of COVID, much more than ever before. As you see here on this slide, we're facing pressure to maintain profit margins, because as this efficiency drives down the revenue that we may receive, because of the fact that people say, oh, well, I can really get it a lot for less of a price on Amazon than buying it directly from the company, then what impact does that have on our local companies? So we've got to deal with that competitiveness. In some cases, partnering with Amazon makes sense. In some cases, it can be a challenge. Proper inventory management then is a must-have to avoid losses. What do you do to endear your customers and clients to your products and services is what's going to make the difference, right, Larry?
Yes, and kind of just at the end of the day, we're hoping that something that we've said in this presentation helps your business better succeed, better improve, grow, and be more successful. And so hopefully we've provided some information to you that you can take back and apply in your businesses.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for the wonderful information and examples and excellent presentation. We had a couple questions that came through the chat throughout the presentation. And the first is about food businesses and specifically on the fulfillment topic. So the first question was, in terms of fulfillment of foodstuffs and specifically across state lines, what are the requirements from the FDA, USDA, and et cetera? And do the same requirements exist for direct to consumer? And if this is a better question answered offline, we can certainly take that offline. What are your initial thoughts on that?
My initial thoughts is it's a great question, and yeah, the more complexities you add to that, foodstuffs, shipments across state lines, the rules are, I think, are going to get more and more complicated. You know, I think it might be there are folks that specialize in these regulations, whether it's attorneys or different advisors that can help you think through what these rules are and what they apply. You can even get into specialized tax situations, and so accountants can play a role. So I think, you know, the more complicated your business gets with these different layers that we're talking about, the more you're going to need to reach out to find either maybe business advisors who've been down that road and done it before. You may be able to find sort of a mentor, if you will, or even professional advisors, attorneys, accountants, and so on, to help make sure you do navigate those complex regulatory issues.
Yep, that's right. I think reaching out to Larry, to Catherine, to myself, to maybe delve into it deeper, especially if there's some specific situations where you're looking for opportunities both to receive inventory or to sell your product outside of the state of Alabama. There are several companies that I've enlisted that serve as mentors. The beautiful benefits of being engaged with organizations like the Birmingham Business Alliance is that we have hundreds of investors who are in businesses that have been doing this type of business for many, many years. And we are happy to delve into this topic. Intrastate and interstate commerce is a big deal, and it is a big opportunity. And we need individuals like those that are on this Zoom call to get more involved in that space. We've got companies here like Emily's Heirloom Pound Cakes that is literally shipping cakes all over the country right now. But you know, she's working with a consultant that is phenomenal, that's helping her in her e-commerce area. And we want to make connections, as Larry said, to whether it's a consultant, whether it's a mentor that does this for free, or a professional that can give you a little bit of time pro bono. We want your company to grow and then put you in a position where, okay, now that I'm making more money, now I can hire the legal and accounting expertise that can help me. And you can also get great support from the International Trade Center and our alliances here in the state of Alabama.
Awesome. Thank you, Victor. I'm going to point out another one of the Small Business Administration's resource partners. SCORE provides mentors that have a lot of the experience that we're talking about. So obviously, I'm going to go back to that initial slide with all the resource partners. Let's see if we can go back here. There we go. So all of these are resource partners that you can go to get connected with. You know, so Jennifer asks, is there a list of resources or a blueprint? Because each individual business is so unique and your personalities are so different, there is no one advisor or CPA or lawyer that's going to work for every single situation. And so shopping around, finding the expertise that matches with what you're trying to do is a really good place to, you know, this is a good place to start by doing that. So getting in touch with the Birmingham Business Alliance, getting in touch with Rev Birmingham, getting in touch with the Alabama Small Business Development Center, and myself, those are all great places to start, and then we can tailor that list to what you specifically need. We had another, sorry, go ahead, Victor.
I was just going to say, it may even be good to begin to build some type of a coalition of individuals in the same, sorry about my phone ringing, it's blocking out my screen. It might be great to build a coalition of individuals that are of like mind, that are facing some similar challenges. And that would be a great way, because again, it's about knowing your numbers, that, you know, materials and overhead and general administrative expenses, making sure we have all that buttoned up. And then as you're ready to go to market to figure out how to handle shipping costs, then you're ready to meet with that mentor and those resources that Catherine is mentioning.
Speaking of resources, Victor, you had mentioned Michael Gunn as a resource. Michael, if you're still on the line, would you mind chiming in with whether you're comfortable sharing your contact information, whether you do operations and inventory management, and if you work with small companies? Put you on the spot there.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. I didn't know if you could hear me at all. My business is primarily in the logistic warehousing with Amazon as a contractor, not so much the inventory aspect of it. We're kind of entering the space of the foreign trade zone, and that, you know, the topic is a really good topic for me as well. But primarily, it's with Amazon and the logistics and transportation.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for attending and for sharing your 2 cents there. I saw that you had your hand up earlier. What was your comment or question that you had, if you don't mind sharing while you're on the line?
The question was about the RFP equipment in terms of affordability for small businesses.
RFID or RFP?
RFD.
Sure, I can touch briefly on that. I don't know the exact cost of this equipment. Usually, I would say, or more commonly, you will see something like RFID tags employed for inventories where you have maybe fewer but higher dollar items, because I think those tags are a little more expensive. You do have to buy them individually, but you can go online and order these RFID tags. There's even an RFID company here in town that would be a great resource to reach out to talk about that. And I think they have or had an online store where you can buy a lot of the parts. So it's not hard to obtain these items, but I do think they tend to be a little more utilized in lower volume, higher dollar value item inventories.
I see them often in medical equipment used in
Exactly.
Larry, while we've got you on the line, this is going to be a perfect question for you if you've got another minute. The question is, currently my company manages inventory and stock periodically. I'd like to push us towards perpetual, but I'm running into a bunch of issues with inventory audits. Could y'all touch on inventory audit best practices and tips?
Sure, I'd be glad to comment on that. And kudos to you for trying to move things forward, push the ball forward in terms of moving towards a perpetual process, and for your honesty that it takes work and effort, and it's not always easy to get there. But I think when you do, it'll be worth it. Yeah, but even when you're on a perpetual, as you've noticed, it can get out of line if you're not careful. And so it's important to have inventory audits at a minimum annually, but I would say the more frequently is even better, particularly if you're having issues. You'll want to do it more often. But I think key to a successful inventory audit is one would be planning it. If you're just going to audit, say, every month or every quarter or every year, you want to make sure that you have a game plan for how you're going to do that. You're going to want to think about, you know, what about items that are moving around depending on the complexity of your business? A lot of businesses, shipments are coming and going all day long. And so you want to think about things like, do I stop for a half a day or 3 days or whatever to count my inventory? Can I afford that? Or will I be able to come up with a system and an approach where I can actually count my inventory and then somehow track and account for items that were in movement during the inventory process? So planning and developing an approach is important. I think the people are important too, and that's the issue that's come up with COVID that we're dealing with a lot of our clients on is, okay, the inventory warehouse may be big and all that, but still, if we're going to count everything, do we want to bring in all our people at once, or can we spread it out over a few months or whatever, so that we can maintain appropriate social distancing. So thinking about the people and how that's going to play in with things like COVID, making sure you have the right people, making sure that you place an importance and a priority on it. Many companies that do an inventory will not just count once, but maybe even count twice. You may count everything, compare it to what's in the system, and then any variances, go back and recount those to make sure you've got it right. And so sort of developing that process of how you go about the inventory is very important.
I can remember when I was a young inventory accountant, and I've been doing it for about maybe a year, and I looked at my supervisor and said, I'm having trouble, finding some of this inventory. He looked at me and he said, that's your biggest responsibility and you better do it right. And that was his first time talking mean to me. And I got up from that moment, and every single day I knew exactly where the inventory was. And every day I was going and getting the receipts. We would get, back then it was by fax, but we would receive exactly what inventory came in that day. And rather than waiting and doing it once a week, because your employees are not going to necessarily have a gun held to their head about doing certain things. That's why workforce development is one of the most important areas for business growth. To Larry's point, we've got to hire the right people. And once we get them in the door, they've got to have habits of discipline. And perpetual inventory is a discipline that requires somebody paying attention to greater detail than ever, versus that periodic once a month, once every 3 months, once a year. I can remember we used to spend about $600,000 on our audit, the Arthur Young, probably a little bit less than what you pay Larry's firm for their audits, but no, Larry's got a good deal over there. But we would get to the audit, and me and the auditor are running around looking for inventory that we couldn't find. And guess what? If we're paying this firm $500 an hour, that's expensive. But when that auditor came back that next year, I knew where every inventory item was, and we knocked out that portion of his audit test in a day versus taking 2 or 3 days. So doing it the right way is the way to go. And I join Larry in applauding you for wanting to move from periodic to perpetual.
Fantastic. We have one last question, and then I'll turn it over to you, Robert, to tell us about what's coming up. So Tim asked, does anybody have suggestions for inventory management or inventory control software besides Excel spreadsheets? And then we had a couple responses. QuickBooks has an inventory management component. And the Rebound Birmingham team, we did a video on that, so you can check that out on our YouTube channel. And then we've also got suggestions of Inventory, NetSuite, Fishbowl would be good services to check out. Victor and Larry, do you have any particular suggestions about software that you commonly see that work for folks?
I think those are great suggestions. I've heard of several of those. And so QuickBooks, if that's what you're using, something that integrates with QuickBooks is good. I think Fishbowl may integrate with QuickBooks. So those are 2 that are good. NetSuite is a nice comprehensive tool that can do your accounting and assist you with your inventory, and it's a popular system. That I believe may be a cloud-based system. QuickBooks can be cloud-based or on-prem. So those are all great tools to look at. I think anything is probably going to be better than Excel typically. Not that Excel is not a place to start, but just because it can be prone to errors and more cumbersome to update. I think as you move to one of these tools, and then eventually you may outgrow some of those tools, but there's always bigger tools all the way up to the giant databases like Oracle and things like that large companies use. So there's plenty of tools out there that run the gamut for any size of business, but I think these are great tools to kind of jump in and get started with.
So the errors in Excel typically come from not being reconciled with your point of sale system. And so the benefit of using many of these other options is that it links right into when you make a sale, that inventory is moved from that category of assets to different categories and eventually out the door So otherwise it's a manual process in Excel, and you've got better things to do. So with that, I will turn it over to Robert to tell us more about what's coming up next.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Larry. We just dropped a lot of knowledge on you, so look for a follow-up email, as Catherine told you, that will include a link to the video, the presentation deck, and also Victor has pulled together a number of resources that we will be sharing with you. So we are coming to the end of Rebound for the fall session of Rebound, if you will. So we only have one left. Next slide, Catherine. I think it's got it. Maybe up one. Let's see. Yeah. Well, we will share that as well. So on Tuesday at 5 o'clock, 5 p.m., that will be our first evening session. Mindy Rohr, who is the marketing manager for Bayer Properties and a social media influencer in her own right, will share how to Instagram like you own it. And that will be exciting, I think an exciting session. If you're not Instagramming, you may be leaving money on the table. And then we are following up on September the 29th. With the, there you go, Instagram like you own it. And then on September the 29th, then the session that Victor mentioned on Amazon. So there you go. And as always, September 28th, my bad. And as always, you can find all of that information on the Rebound website. So thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on Tuesday evening.
Thank you, everybody, so much for your time this morning. Really appreciate it. Hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you.